If you want to fight someone, fight me. And someone came and struck off the arm that was holding the flag in his hand. He simply reached down and picked it up with the other hand and began to draw attention to himself again, saying, if you want to fight with someone, fight me, so that the Prophet ﷺ could escape safely. And then someone came and took off the other arm holding the flag. But the same boy who grew up in decadence, who loved the Prophet ﷺ so much, loved Allah Azza wa Jal even more, it wasn't enough. He bent down and picked up the flag with his teeth and began to draw attention to himself again, until he was struck and struck and struck and struck and struck again, swords and spears, and he hit the ground. Nothing left in him, and he died. The Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims retreated up into the mountain of Uhud. While they were there, the Meccans mutilated the bodies of the dead Muslims, cutting off their noses and their ears and trampling them with their horses. After they left, the Prophet ﷺ went back down onto the battlefield to sort out the affairs of the dead believers. But there was a few people he was asking about. Have you seen so-and-so? He wanted to know, have you seen Ja'far? Have you seen Hamza? Has any of you seen Mus'ab? When the Prophet ﷺ found Mus'ab ibn Umair, they had cut off his nose and ears. They had trampled them with their horses. He had almost 100 stab wounds and spear wounds in him. But one thing they did find was they found the flag was still between his teeth. He never abandoned his duty. And the Prophet began to cry about Mus'ab, saying that you gave everything for the sake of Allah. So they sent people to collect the property of the martyrs, because it gets distributed right away, and then to find their kafan, their shroud. So when they went to get the shroud and the property of Mus'ab ibn Umair, they brought back three things. He had a bowl to make wudu and a ghusl, and half of a shroud. He couldn't afford a full one. And the Prophet ﷺ just cried. This young boy who grew up in this life of decadence now didn't even have enough to die in. He didn't even possess enough in this life to be buried. So the Prophet covered his head and his feet would stick out. So he started at his feet, his head would stick out. So they wrapped his head and they covered his feet in lemongrass and they buried him right where he laid. But we all know, before his body was ever put in that ground, that soul that was attached to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in Jannah. And every day he is asked by Allah, what can I give you? What do you want? I want to give you more. What do you want from me? And these people who live hanging off the throne of Allah Azza wa Jal, they never want anything. Till finally they will realize one day that Allah will not stop asking us unless we tell Him what we want. And they will respond, our Lord, if you could give us one thing, then let us go back to that life and die again in that same way, again and again and again and again. It's all we would ask for. It was a life that was lived. Even though he barely made it to adulthood, in most cases we wouldn't have ever considered him an adult yet. He lived a life that we will memorize and that we remember to this day. When his name is mentioned to someone who really believes, to someone who really understands, it causes chills. Because this young man set a platform in Yathrib that would have it become known as Madinatul Nabi, upon which the Prophet ﷺ would send Islam to the whole world.